Okay. Um, so my paper today just provides an overview of how digital photographs can be used to help us think critically about pregnant embodied experiences, drawing on data from a study that I conducted recently in Tasmania in Australia. So I'll say just give you a brief idea of my conceptual framework. Conceptually, my research draws on the work of Bourdieu and Barthes, as well as Annette Kuhn's scholarship on photography and memory. This work has also really been heavily influenced by the work of Sandra Matthews and Laura Wexler and their very groundbreaking book called Pregnant Pictures, and it's been a real thrill to actually meet Sandra Matthews, who's here today. So that was my my hero moment. I've also drawn on Iris Marion Young's groundbreaking work in her 1980 essay about pregnant embodiment, as well as my own previous studies of pregnant body image, which I document in my new book called Making Postmodern Mothers. So in general, we've seen two types of images of pregnancy. The first type is obstetrical. And as Matthews and Wexler have pointed out, historically, medical textbooks have routinely presented truncated images of women's bodies. But the other type of image that we've seen is a sexualized one. Following Demi Moore, slender celebrities are regularly featured naked and pregnant in the tabloid media. Yet these two types of images really fail to capture the emotions that accompany embodied experiences of pregnancy. So to address this gap, I used a modified version of the Photovoice method to explore how women would document their own embodied experiences if they were given a digital camera. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with Photovoice, it's basically a qualitative, participatory, and visual approach to research. So participants are given cameras to document their lives. They then engage in a dialogue about the photographs in relation to a particular issue that you're interested in studying. And the final stage of the method involves participants in selecting their most significant or their favorite photographs to display in a community exhibition to mobilize change in the community. So in my study, I'll just say briefly what I did. I recruited 12 pregnant women in Tasmania. I gave them cameras, and I invited them to take photos of things that they felt were significant in terms of their experiences of their pregnant experiences, and I interviewed them 4 times about their photos. So the study took place throughout pregnancy and then through part of the postpartum period. And then the images were analyzed using thematic analysis. And I recently exhibited the photos in a community exhibition in Hobart, and the photos on the slide are just some little snaps from the photos that I displayed. Nearly 1,500 photographs were produced in the project among 12 women, which is quite a lot. So considering the huge amount of data that was produced, I'm just going to talk very briefly about the photos, some of the photos that were related to body image that really demonstrate how women use digital photographs to mediate between previous and current selves. So starting with early pregnancy. The photographs from early pregnancy in my cohort really demonstrated this ambivalence around what I call in-betweenness. And this is a way that I use to describe pregnant bodies when women report that they do not feel or look pregnant. So there were very few self-portraits up until about 16 weeks gestation. And the ambivalence associated with in-betweenness is reflected in Lisa's photo. As she says in the quote, without a belly that is visibly marked as pregnant, Lisa, like other women, read her body as fat and incompletely pregnant. Now, Christine was also distressed about her feelings of discontinuity between pregnant and pre-pregnant identities in these early stages of pregnancy. And for her, the mushroom encapsulated how unrecognizable she had become to herself. And as she says in this quote on the slide, I mean, it's a bit of a long quote, but not fitting into her clothes really marked this startling loss of identity for her in those early weeks. As women moved into visible pregnancy, there were many more self-portraits, and often these portraits used mirrors. So from about 16 weeks onward, women saw visible pregnancy as a resolution to this in-betweenness, the in-between stage. Now, when Diane Arbus photographed herself pregnant in a mirror in 1945, the idea of doing so was quite unusual at the time. In this particular photo, she appears to be contemplating her multiple selves. But thanks to digital photography, the gesture of pointing the camera, or now the mobile phone, at oneself is very common. And these images offer us different instances of representing the self digitally. In mid to late pregnancy, mirror images were used to help my participants come to an understanding of their pregnant selves. And these photos are interesting because they tend to show women as they see themselves at this moment in time. And I really like these images because they're relatively unconventional in that they show the women's bellies from quite unusual angles, and they seem to be really about playful self-discovery. However, these photos also seem to be used by women to veil themselves, as they present only fragmented aspects of their bodies. So from one perspective, these baby bump photos make reference to the considerable ambiguity that women feel in relation to their bodily boundaries in mid to late pregnancy, as fetuses start to move and establish themselves as separate beings. In this instance, a photograph of a belly without a head can transform into a picture of the unborn and not a mother. But from another perspective, as several women were feeling unhappy about how they looked during pregnancy, it's unsurprising that some of them felt the urge to crop their heads out of the frame because they didn't recognize the person in the photo. So the pictures became not me. Now, although this type of photograph has typically been theorized through the lens of the male gaze, it's not clear from the photographs themselves that the women are being objectified or that the gaze invoked is necessarily male. When I asked my participants about why they took these pictures, their responses were much more complex. The images were not only taken in order to document the growth of a baby. It was not just a baby bump photo. So in this sense, I think about these photos as showing that women are both subjects and objects of the pictures. And the next two photos that I'm going to show you are good examples of how digital self-portraits in pregnancy participate in the shaping of bodies and subjectivities. Now, Rachel took this photograph to compare her appearance at 20 weeks gestation in two pregnancies, so her past and her present selves. And she said the photo is necessary because, quote, "In the mirror you can see how you look, but then it's over. A mirror image is how you see yourself. The photo is how others see you. You can't ignore it." Now, at first glance, these pictures seem like a true representation because everything we see in the picture is reflected in the mirror and captured by a camera. But upon closer inspection, Rachel's photograph invites the viewer to question it. Unlike Diane Arbus's photo, we cannot see the edges of the mirror in either image. There is no guarantee that the camera that we see in the photographs has recorded its own reflection. It is possible that the photograph was produced by a second camera that we cannot see. We cannot see Rachel's head in either image, but it is very clear to us that her eye is not pressed to a viewfinder. It is possible that she manipulated the images, cropping out her head, enhancing her former and current selves. So for Rachel, the punctum of the image was the size of her belly. It did not appear to be as huge as she remembered it to be. This detail sent her into an abyss of remembering how much thinner she was prior to her first pregnancy, former and current selves intertwining. She posted this photo on Facebook, inviting comment from a micro-audience of friends and family as a way of reconciling her feelings about her current and former selves. Now, Joan's photograph, which was taken around 24 weeks gestation, can also be discussed in relation to subjectivity and representation. Now, in contrast to Rachel, we just looked at her photo, for Joan, the mirror was a tool for reasserting herself based on her feelings about being a public spectacle as a pregnant woman. So here, in this photo, Joan visually commented on the shifting relationship between mother and fetus, given that the photograph was taken from her perspective using a mirror. In contrast to the other photos, the omission of her head in this image was a conscious decision. It was like an act of resistance to these cultural changes in which the unborn have rendered pregnant women literally transparent in public. So just to summarize, my participants' visual accounts of their bodies reflect the more varied realities of pregnant embodiment compared to the quite limited range of public images of pregnancy that we're used to seeing. In this project, digital photos played a significant role in the constitution of pregnant women's subjectivities. Digital photography enabled my participants to choose whether or not and how they would represent themselves as subjects of their photos. And the ability to make these kinds of determinations was important in itself in establishing these women as subjects. But digital cameras, of course, change the way in which the enculturation of identity occurs. So, for example, Rachel took those photos I discussed earlier with the camera on her mobile phone. She put the images together on her computer. She then photographed the screen with the camera that I gave her for the project. And she posted the photo on Facebook for public comment. So, as this shows, with the increased variety, flexibility, and sources of digital images, these women had much more support for memory work in pregnancy than they would have in the past. These photos were also essential in helping women to chart their rapidly changing bodies, and to a great extent, the project and these pictures provide material evidence of this temporality. And these concerns around fatness and body image in particular, again, reflect the changing norms for pregnant embodiment that we're seeing, and that I also document in my book. So I began this paper with the observation that there's been a relatively limited range of pregnancy pictures circulating in public. But I end this paper with the view that participant-produced photos invite us into a world of pregnant embodiment that's normally concealed from view.